Welcome to Off Panel, Sketch.com's weekly podcast. This week's guest is a seasoned veteran of the comic retail game and the owner of Comix Experience and Comix Experience Outpost in San Francisco. It's Brian Hibbs. Thanks for coming on the show, Brian.
I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So,
Happy New Year.
Oh, yes. Happy New Year.
To all your listeners as
well. So I'm putting together a big look at how the world of comics was for retailers in 2015. And like I said, You're a seasoned veteran of the retail world. And that's what I was hoping to talk to you about today. You've written a bit about this already, but how was the year for you and your shops? I want to start there.
Well, so the year for us was really strong, particularly the first three quarters. The fourth quarter slowed down a bit. But the main store, which is 26 years old, was up 14% this year, which seems really fantastic to me for a 14-year-old store. You know, it's if you look at sort of over the history of the store, we tend to average, you know, sort of 2-3% growth. Basically, you know, the same way that the consumer price index goes up. Mm-hmm. So for us to just kind of shatter that, you know, as an extraordinarily mature store, perhaps even a senior citizen store by those standards, is really great. You know, I think that's really terrific. The newer store, the Outpost, which we've only owned for 2 years, it was also a pre-existing store, but we've only had it for 2 years. They were up over 20%, mm-hmm. And I put a significant part of that into the new management and just kind of freshening the place up. So.
That's incredible. Well, one thing that I think is really interesting about the difference between your stores is the fact that Experience, the main store, if I remember correctly, is more it's very graphic novel oriented. It sells a lot more indie books, while the Outpost is much more Marvel and DC oriented. That's mostly just because of what it was before you bought it, right?
Outpost, yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you buy a store, you don't want to completely change it,
sure,
like entirely, because you want the people who are already shopping there to feel like they're at home. Mm-hmm. So we've largely kept the mix the same. I mean, we're trying to bring in new books and new things so that, you know, people can see what their options are. Mm-hmm. You know, the previous owner, I don't think particularly cared, especially about independent comics.
Right.
And you know, stores always reflect the tenor of the owner. You know, and I want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with not liking alternative comics, you know, mm-hmm. Or independent comics. You know, if your thing is you're really, 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 really into Spider-Man, that's a perfectly cool store to own. Mm-hmm. But you know, when I came in and owned it, I was like, I got to change this a little bit. So we've been slowly trying to add more stuff. You know, I always think that it's a slow process to get customers acclimated to something other than the thing that they're already used to buying. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of hand selling. It takes a lot of hand holding. It takes a lot of, you know, sort of talking to people and seeing how much of what they're buying is purely based on the characters,
right,
and how much of it is based upon the writers and the artists that they like, and how much of it is based on inertia, and then just having conversations with them to try and help them find the comics they're going to like the best. And if that turns out that that's Marvel and DC superhero comics, then awesome.
Yeah.
But if it turns out that actually, you know, they really like Batman, but they really, 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 really like Snyder and Capullo, mm-hmm. then that's something that you can do something with, you know?
Yeah.
And slowly start turning people onto other books and other things that are out there.
Well, and it seems like the key really to retail, like any business, isn't necessarily like, I mean, it's not like you intend to push people towards indie books. You're just pushing people towards books that you think they'll enjoy and will create more interest in them as comic fans.
Exactly. Though, you know, I mean, having said that, I do think overall that you're, in the long run, you're going to get more, you know, more entertainment and more love out of things where the creators are truly passionate about what they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to just doing a job for a paycheck.
Yeah.
And so that tends to be, I mean, speaking very, very broadly, but that tends to be independent comics as opposed to corporate comics.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, so here's one thing I think is really interesting about retail, and it's something that I haven't seen brought up a lot, and it's that you look at your store, or you look at like Big Bang Comics in Dublin, who like shared a top 100 graphic novels list yesterday. Same thing with Challengers Comics and Conversation in Chicago. You guys all are big time names in comics retail, and when you look at your guys' lists, I mean, like I was looking through your top issues of the year and everything like that, and things like Monstrous are on there, and Island, and books that weren't top sellers nationally, but those books are doing incredibly well for you. Like, I guess one of the things that I'm curious is like, is that mostly down to like hand selling, or is that that's what it is?
No, it is. It's absolutely down to hand selling, and particularly in the case of Monstrous and Island, I really put a lot of that heavy lifting on. Image had a returnable program for much of last year, where they, you can order as many copies of books as you want, and if you don't sell them, you send them back.
I had no idea they were doing that.
Yeah, they're not doing it for every book. They're just doing it for a select number of titles, and it's for the first 4 issues. But it allowed us to look at something, particularly like an Island, right? Anthologies are hard sells. I mean, they really are. They're really, really, really difficult sells in the American market. But I looked at Brandon Graham and all the people that he had put together in that package, and I went, wow, that is an astonishing package. And so, I think we can sell triple digits of this book, but if I was having to pay full price for them in non-returnable, I wouldn't have ordered triple digits. I would have ordered low double digits, not single digits. That would be horrible. But I would have ordered 10 or 15 or 20 copies to start, and then reordered as needed. But we were able to bring in 100 copies up front and really be able to sell them because we knew that the publisher had our back in that case. What's curious to me is that Image has seemed to back off of that program the last couple of months, and I'm led to believe it's because very few retailers are actually using it.
Interesting.
Which seems kind of crazy to me, but I sometimes don't understand my fellow retailers. It's true.
Well, I mean, there is the idea that I'm trying to remember who told me, but somebody told me that like I think 50% of Diamond accounts only order Marvel and DC. And that may just be one of those made up statistics that somebody read on a coaster somewhere, but it is interesting to think that like that might be a contributing factor as to why like Image is trying to stoke the flames of ordering, and just some people just aren't taking up on it because they still are heavy on Marvel and DC.
Well, sure, because you got to understand the reason that someone opens a comic book store is not to get filthy, stinking rich.
Right.
Right.
Passion.
You can make money. You can make more money doing almost anything else than owning a comic book store.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to make it sound like, oh my God, we're poor and everything's terrible. I do okay for myself, but if I had chose a different career, I could be making probably twice as much of an income as I do. You do this because you're passionate about it and because you believe in it and because it's something that really, really matters to you. But people's passion comes from what they enjoy, I've always enjoyed comics as a medium, but there are certainly many, 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 many people out there who like comics as a genre,
right.
or the genres of comics, I should say.
Right.
And so I don't have any kind of emotional weight to that. I think it's cool. If again, like I said, if you're really the biggest Spider-Man fan in the universe and you want to open a store that's primarily focused on Spider-Man and everything else kind of walks around that, then right on, man, if you can make that work, and I think that for decades, literally for decades, you could make that work. You could be a superhero store and it would work just great. But that's starting to change, I think.
Right.
I think it's starting to change, as much because the taste of the audience, because the audience is changing, because the taste of the audience is changing, but also because of the corporate stewardship of Marvel and DC, where, I think as little as 10 years ago, again, the majority of people who were working at those companies were working at those companies because they really, really, truly believed in the thing that they were doing. I am slightly less sure that is the case today. That's not to say there aren't people there who absolutely believe in what they're doing. Of course there are, but they're subsumed in larger corporate brands, and there are pressures to to treat them like larger corporate brands, and that deforms the way that you feel about things and the way that you approach things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want
kind of a rant almost. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm going to bring out some other rants in you, Brian.
Yeah.
But no, I want to get to Marvel and DC a little bit later. But one thing I want to talk about before moving on from the line we were talking about before is I think it's really interesting that the two of the books that I mentioned that did really well for you were Monstrous, which was a $4.99 first issue that was it was 66 issues. It was fantastic, and it was a great comic. And then you had Island, which effectively every issue is a trade paperback, and they're $7.99. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things I think is really interesting is you found that you think that $9.99 first volume Image trades is actually costing Image money, and I think that that's interesting. So you think that those first volumes would sell just as well at a higher price point?
I think most of the time, yes. I think that there are a couple of edge cases where people, can be swayed by the $9.99 price point. Mm-hmm. But I think for the most part, most consumers are not buying by price.
Right.
What I find as a person who sells comics face-to-face to people is that if we are enthusiastic and energetic and passionate and just communicating how much on fire we are about something, whether it's $9.99 or $19.99, doesn't matter as much as being able to communicate that passion. Now, that's not to say there aren't price points, that make it difficult to sell a book. Once you start crossing $24.99, it gets a lot harder. Mm-hmm. It's a lot harder. But I don't think the difference between $9.99 and $14.99 makes a huge difference. Now, it makes a difference, yes, absolutely. I believe that we would still be selling 95% of what we're selling of all those $9.99 books. Because they're books that we push, right? Mm-hmm. We push Saga, we push Bitch Planet. Those are books that we really like, that we get behind, that we believe in. Those books will continue to sell. So I think that we end up just losing a third of the revenue from it. And I don't think that that's a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing for my store. And I don't think that that's a good thing for the creators who are involved.
Yeah. Well, and do you find that goes like the same price elasticity, or inelasticity, I guess, goes to single issues as well? Like, so here's a good example. Now, I'm 100% a quality guy, and I've very much enjoyed Chip Zdarsky and Joe Quinones on Howard the Duck. But I have to admit, Marvel actually pushed me off that book because the second and third issues for that book were on the relaunch were $4.99, and I was like, I could just wait for trade, or I could go for Marvel Unlimited. Do you find that people have a little bit less, they'll break their habits easier for higher price single issues than they would trades?
Well, sure, but so it's a really complicated question. Right?
Oh, sure.
And I don't think that you can look at it necessarily in isolation.
It's a case by case basis situation.
Right. I mean, I think part of it is the overall price of what you're buying versus how much enjoyment you feel like you're getting from it. Mm-hmm. I think that there are different decisions that people are going to make based upon what the actual comic is versus that I think it's a lot harder to spend $5 on Howard the Duck #1 than it would if not #1, but Howard the Duck than if, for example, let's just say that Saga suddenly went to $4.99. I don't think that we would lose very many readers. I really don't. Because I think that people believe in that book and love that book, and they'll pay whatever it will take to get that book. Now, having said that, there is absolutely a relationship between price and ability to sell, and that's one of the reasons I think that OGNs have never really taken off, because they're too expensive to sample. Mm-hmm. Right? Like once you cross that sampling barrier where it's easy to sample and inexpensive to sample, then you've got a real sales problem. Mm-hmm. Well, but below that line, you're fine, and part of it, the other part of it is, and this puts me in a very, very unique place, but we're in San Francisco. San Francisco is now the most expensive market in the world, not in the world, but in America at least. It might be in the world. I don't know. But, rents are preposterous here. Everybody's a millionaire, it seems like, though nobody has any money. So the idea of a $4.99 comic book is not actually crazy here because burritos are $13.
Those better
Right?
be some damn good burritos.
Well, they actually are. Mission-style burritos are the greatest burritos in the world. You've never had a burrito if you haven't had a San Francisco burrito. I honestly believe that. It's just like New York bagels. So our relationship to cover price may be very different than other markets' relationships to cover price.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I do think it's interesting though, because it's like, it kind of seems like your shop, and I'm sure plenty of other shops, what you guys are really pushing has literally no, like, there's no relationship to price. Like if you believe in a comic, you're going to push it no matter what. And that's something you're going to be looking at.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. But again, I mean, there are limits. If Saga was $4.99, I think everybody would keep buying it. If Saga was $7.99 an issue, I think that a lot of people would stop reading it.
Right.
There's a line there, right? And it's gonna go case by case, and it's gonna go by like one of the things that you mentioned was for Howard the Duck, you could just wait for trades. Well, that's because Marvel prices their trades about the same as they price their comics.
Right.
So there's actually no real advantage to buy the periodical to a certain extent from that point of view, because you're not really saving any money at the end. In fact, there have been a couple of cases where Marvel has actually printed their trades more expensive than the comics that it collected.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that influences things as well.
Yeah, I actually remember one very specific example, because I remember I really wanted to read. I had heard good things from my friend about All New X-Men from Bendis and Immonen and everybody else, and the first hardcover came out and it was $25 and it was 5 issues, and I was like, how could they do this math? Yep. It makes no sense.
Yep.
But anyways, so one I mentioned this before. Comix Experience Prime. You guys, your biggest sellers are trades, graphic novels, collections, right?
Yep, 60% of our sales are books.
Do you find, and I know that it sounds like it's like maybe a higher barrier to entry for some, but do you see that the industry is shifting more heavily in that direction in the future, or is that just kind of how Comix Experience has always been?
Well, we've been that way for a while. I mean, like a decade or more, and it's because of how we rack the store and what we display, and It used to be so a lot of this comes from when I started.
Right.
Booking in the past, 1989. It really seems like a really long time ago. But comic book stores back then were back issue stores, right? I mean, that's what we were. We sold back issues. The new comics were never a terribly huge part of the business. I mean, it was a third or maybe up to half, but back issues was really what you were when you opened a store back then. And the paperback has replaced the back issue,
right.
Like all to the better as far as I'm concerned. I can reorder paperbacks. I can't reorder back issues. So I mean that's like my particular journey there. I do think that there is certainly it is sometimes easier to sell people on, civilians on paperbacks because they're complete thoughts rather than periodical thoughts.
Right.
But at the same time, you have to look at the price points and the barrier. It is much easier to sell someone a $2.99 or a $3.99 comic book than it is a $20 to $25 book.
Right.
Just period. I mean, I could go over any number of books that we've sold over the years, where we would sell, 100 copies as a comic book, and then it comes out as an original graphic novel and you sell 15 or 20, because there's just fewer people who want to take the risk at the higher price point unless they hear about it from a lot of people, yeah, I mean, it's a tricky conundrum. Well, it's a really fine balance to walk.
Yeah, I know we're kind of getting deep into comic consumer behavior here, but do you find that I mean, I've always been curious as to whether or not part of the reason for what you just said, that the people who you'll sell 100 copies of, let's say, Secret Wars #1, or let's say 200 copies. I have no idea, a bunch.
Sure.
And then when the trade comes out, you only sell 10 or 20. But do you think at least part of that is because of comic fans are constantly horrified of the idea of being spoiled. I mean, I think it's part of the reason why All New, All Different has been kind of weird, is because it dropped before Secret Wars ended, and there's been an entire contingent of people who don't want to have Secret Wars spoiled for them, even though I don't think it's really doing that. But
Sure.
do you think that's part of the mentality for why?
Well, of course, that's part of it. There's a million parts of it that are part of it. Do I think it's the major part? No, I think the major part is that material that isn't serialized, becomes inherently more expensive because you can't amortize the costs,
Sure.
right? So that same material that would have cost you, $3 an issue, $18, let's say, as a periodical comic, is going to cost you $25 as an OGN. It just is.
Yeah.
And so when, it becomes more expensive, the buy-in's harder, it's more difficult to go, am I going to get value for what I'm spending? Like, if what you're spending is the cost of a cup of coffee, it's much easier to justify, well, if I don't like it, it's okay. But when it starts being, your coffee for a week, then it's like, this really needs to be good, otherwise I'm wasting my money.
Yeah, that's true.
And I guess that's how I would characterize it. There. I do absolutely think that serializing comics is the absolute best way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish more things that are book only would do serialization, because I think we'd be healthier in many, many ways. And again, you amortize the costs in a way, you provide cash flow. It's just better all around.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, now I'm going to get into the potentially darker area. So, sure. I know you think this, I think it, but you wrote it in your write-up, and I wanted to ask, you said DC's in serious trouble.
Serious trouble.
Yeah. And I'm writing an article about that right now. And there's many reasons, but from your perspective and from what you've heard from your customers, like, why is it that they're doing so poorly right now? Like, why are they hemorrhaging readers, it seems?
Well, okay, so the one thing I would say off the top of my head immediately is that the DC and Marvel universes. Okay, wait. So let's take even half a step back, right?
Sure.
I don't actually believe that people like superheroes.
Interesting.
Not actually, right? I mean, not that they hate superheroes or anything, but I don't think that anybody. I think that if there were no superheroes and then suddenly someone started creating a superhero today, I don't think anyone would care, beyond just a really small number, and it would not become like it is today. I think what people like is the Marvel universe and the DC universe. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's the thing they're attracted to, is the soap opera nature of it. Yeah. Of the here's 50 to 75 years of history. These characters go back. They have relationships. They age over time, ever so slowly. But things do change. Yeah. Ever so slowly. I think that's what people like about those books.
I totally buy that.
It's the reason why no superhero universe has ever actually succeeded. With the possible exception of the early Image stuff. But again, I would tell you that stuff sold based upon creator and not based upon any affection for superheroes in and of themselves. So, where was I going with that? So because people like the universes, DC took a really, really big gamble when they restarted their universe. Mm-hmm. New 52 was a huge gamble. And it paid off really, really well for about the first year. Right. It attracted a whole lot of new eyes. I mean, let's talk about how DC was directly before the New 52 launch. DC was in very, very, very deep trouble then as well. Mm-hmm. Okay. DC was, I think, within a year of being collapsed down to 12 titles, mm-hmm. or something equally, heinous like that, licensed out to someone else to let them publish the comics instead. Yeah. It was getting to the point where sales were not viable. If you look at the sales charts, on the bread and butter superhero stuff, the sales were terrible. The direction was awful. No one cared. So they revitalized that. They brought in all of these new people. Everybody was excited. But the problem was they didn't have 52 comic books that were good. Right. They had about 5 comic books that were good. And they had 47 comic books that were Well, they had 40 comic books that were awful, you know? And that's the bigger problem, that they had a lot of just shit that was literally shit being flung at a wall to see if it would stick.
Right.
And, you know, as we all see it, most of it didn't stick because you don't get good comics by flinging shit at a wall,
right.
you know? If you plan it out, you know, like I would argue to you that All New, All Different, although it is not succeeding in the way that 52 did, is creatively a much, much stronger line. Like they clearly planned out a lot of what is happening in All New, All Different. Well, and I think the books reflect that.
I just to make a quick aside, I think a huge difference between, you know, where New 52 was and Marvel All New, All Different is Marvel's collection of creators and like the bench, like they have a very deep bench of creators, and DC just they didn't have the depth necessary to launch 52 books and creatively.
Yep. No, I fundamentally agree with that. They would have been so much better if they had launched 13 and then grown from there rather than, you know, starting with 50, 52 and winnowing.
Right.
So as a result, nobody stuck. Right? They had all of these. I mean, and I really don't want to understate how huge New 52 was for that first year. I mean, it was. I have not seen superhero comics sell like that in a really long time. And it was actually exciting. It made me challenge like that belief that I just told you about how people don't want superhero comics. It actually was challenging that for a little while.
Right.
You know? But then everybody walked away, you know? I don't know, they walked away because the comics weren't any good, you know?
Right.
So maybe you can't train people to like superheroes. There was a moment that people were like, let's check this shit out. And
they were curious.
And they were curious, and then their curiosity was not repaid, you know, with the exception of Batman and Justice League, which are the two books that stayed up in circulations, right? Mm-hmm. You know? Batman is the standard bearer for sales right now because it's an excellent comic book, you know?
I do think it's really interesting, and like this is something that's never happened to me before, but New 52 was the one time in my life where I had random friends and family ask me, like, what's the deal with all this DC stuff?
Right. Right. Well, because and here's the other thing. Here's the other thing that they did, and we literally have to give them the props for this. They marketed that.
Oh yeah.
They actually marketed that to the real world. Mm-hmm. You know, I saw actual advertisements in places. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean that doesn't happen, and so yeah, it turns out that if you advertise comics, then people know about them, then they buy them.
Yeah.
Oh, how interesting is that?
It's funny that that's such a bizarre situation. It's like, I can't believe it. This is an outlandish idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, again, a lot of, you know, everything that happens in a marketplace is from the decisions that were made by your forebears.
Right.
Right. And how a market evolves to where that it is. For 25 years, comics were not the kind of thing that you really could advertise because culturally they were looked upon as trash and garbage.
Right.
You know, it used to be that people would walk past the door of Comics Experience and you would hear them and they go, comic books, oh, they still make those?
Oh, yeah.
You know, and now it's comic books, oh, my God, let's go in. Yeah. You know, I mean, the difference is astonishing. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that the audience would have been receptive to advertising, you know, messages more than a couple of years ago. But anyway, so let's keep going with DC here. So they blew it with the new readership,
right?
But the existing readership, the hardcore readership, the long-term readership, those 10,000 guys who were buying Superman and Flash and whatever every single month without fail because they had all the issues going back 25 years. A significant percentage of those people left and stopped reading.
Right.
Not all of them, not by any means all of them, but a significant percentage of them stopped. Look, you're not going to find a bigger Justice Society fan in the world than me. I fucking love the JSA, and I don't give two shits about Earth 2.
Right.
I mean, I literally don't, you know? I don't buy those comics. I don't want those comics. I have no interest in those comics. If they all get canceled tomorrow, okay. Yeah. I'm not going to cry, you know? So, and I think that that's true for a lot of people, for a lot of things, for a lot of books, you know? I don't think that you can argue plausibly that bringing back Barry Allen yielded better comics.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, no, I mean, and especially not to make this a Flash thing, but I was a Wally West fan, and I feel like, like Barry Allen was reflective of a time, and I feel like Wally West was reflective of a time, and like I don't even know if either of them are reflective of today's era, and
Right.
and it is just interesting. Like, so not to spoil my own article if I don't write it before this goes up, but I think one of the questions that always comes up to me when I think about where DC's at right now is who is this for?
Right.
And like it's really weird that I can't think of an answer to that for like a lot of their line, because like I mean when you look down at the bottom it's just like I mean like DC couldn't have imagined that a book like Doomed would do well,
Right.
and yet
well, no, so what they did, and look, DC under Dan, and I like Dan tremendously, but Dan appears to have a very, very short attention span.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He likes shiny stuff. He likes whatever's new and whatever's hot at the second. Right? So when that Doomed crossover was happening in the Superman books, and there was at least some interest expressed by the audience because, Doomsday, we haven't seen that character in a while.
Sure.
They interpreted that as we can do a book.
Mm-hmm.
People want this, right? It's the same way that they put out that Telos comic after Convergence.
Right.
Because they saw the initial numbers, but the initial numbers were hyperinflated by returnability.
Right.
But they went, oh my God, it's a hit. Let's like immediately greenlight something out of this,
Mm-hmm.
and no, the people didn't want that, and of course, and it retroactively became a miniseries,
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody wanted it.
Right.
They're making decisions not based upon, to my eye and to my taste, what are good comics, or what is something that someone is passionate about,
Right.
but to how do we maximize sales and sell? You know what I mean? Like it's this is what I was saying about that sort of corporate thinking about it's not about the content as much. I'm not going to say not at all, because obviously everybody who works there loves comics. You wouldn't be working at a comic place if you didn't love comics.
Right.
But your brain gets skewed when you have people above you telling you actually the most important thing though is hitting your numbers.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to hit your numbers. If you don't hit your numbers, we're going to have big problems.
Yeah, they're super disappointed right now.
Yeah. So and I don't see how you fix it. And that's the thing, because as you said, they don't have a bench anymore.
No.
Right.
No.
And bringing in new guys. Like Rich had a report, I think, that Matt Rosenberg is going to start writing a bunch of stuff at DC. Great. Matt's a great fucking writer. If you don't give those guys their head, though, and let them do kind of whatever the hell they want, you're not going to get good comics out of it, right? The reason that Alan Moore was revelatory was because they gave him Swamp Thing and nobody cared what he did with it.
Yeah, it was Swamp Thing.
It didn't fucking matter. Do whatever you want to, man. We're going to cancel this book anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I can do this. Same thing with Grant Morrison on Doom Patrol and Animal Man.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Shade the Changing Man. Same thing with fucking Sandman. Okay,
Right.
and all of those books hitting at that same moment became Vertigo, and it became a thing because you let people just kind of go nuts,
Mm-hmm.
but you also have people who recognize what good comics are, shepherding them.
Right.
And I will say this for basically almost every publisher in this business, I am not convinced that 90% of the editors actually know what a good comic book is, or how to get the best comicking out of the people who are working for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that being an editor has unfortunately becoming a traffic manager in the modern industry. And I'll give you a really good example. Vertigo just relaunched, right, with 12 comics, 12
Right.
new number ones. Of those 12 new number ones, I don't think that but 2 or 3 of them actually had their premise in the first issue. No, and you laugh, but I mean, I'm totally serious.
No,
I read those first issues, and I said, I have read the solicitation copy, so I know what the premise of the comic book is. But I could not detect the premise of the comic in those 22 pages.
I'm going to be totally honest with you. Like everybody loves Twilight Children, and I think it's a beautiful book, and I love Darwin
Right.
Cook, and I love Gilbert Hernandez. But I've read it's a 4-issue miniseries. 3 issues have been out. I still don't know exactly what that comic is about.
Yeah. See, I'm actually going to give that one a pass though, because that's very clearly a magical realism tradition.
Yeah, sure.
It's its own thing. I'm talking about something a little more primal, like Unfollow. Okay, Unfollow has a great fucking premise, right? 140 characters through social media. It has 140 characters in the book. They're all competing for a prize, and they start to kill each other. Great fuck. I mean, that's a log line. You can. If someone comes to you and go, "What's this story?" You can tell them what the story is, right?
And they'd say it's cool.
I read that first issue though. That is not in the comic book.
Yeah.
All the comic book is introducing like 3 or 4 of the characters with no indication of what's going to happen next, that there's any confrontation between these characters, that there's anything. It's not how you can't put out a comic book like that and expect the audience to genuinely care, because you're not giving them anything to care about for the entertainment unit that you're asking them to pay for, right? And I think a lot of it is that people's brains are getting fucked up by binge watching stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that if you hear like, oh, this show sounds like it's got an interesting premise, so I'll watch it. The first one wasn't very good. Oh, but the second one comes on screen in 8, 7. I guess I'll watch another one. You know what I mean? Like you don't turn it all. You know, like people just like they keep watching. You know, I was just watching Sense8 the other day, and you know, it's not until the 5th episode that anything kind of happens at all. You know?
Yeah.
You know, but I was watching them because it was pretty in it, and they kept popping up on my television without me having to lift a fucking finger. You know.
Well, no. I mean,
so you know, but you can't do that with entertainment that people are paying for the unit of entertainment, right?
Sure.
So there's a fundamental difference between television, which in every model so far is either a pay for a big bucket and eat all you can out of the bucket, or get it for free.
Right.
That's how television works, you know? That's not how comics work. Comics work, you pay for it. You pay for it. Oh, you can buy a big bucket, but all the big bucket's all old stuff.
Yeah.
You know? And it's not even everything, you know?
Do you think that to a certain degree, and like, because I think the binging thing is kind of entered into comics to a certain degree too, or at least in the mentality. Do you feel like to a certain degree some creators work more, or it may by guidance of editors and everything, work more or write and create more for trade these days?
Well, sure.
Okay, I was just curious if you thought that.
But I mean, I think that's a trend that's been going on for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
You know, I think you could point to basically all of Bendis's career as that.
Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
And I think that with guys like Bendis and Brubaker, when they were doing that early on, I think it was very different at that moment compared to the comic books that were around them, right? And I think that difference was what made their periodicals attractive, if that makes any sense. Like that's kind of, I know that sounds backwards and bizarre.
No, different is good. Different stands out.
But now, since so many people are trying to write for the book rather than to write for the single issue, you know, I think that's another one of the reasons that circulations on periodicals are declining. You know, on sort of average, you know, stuff.
Well, I don't think you ever want something to be one thing, and that's the reason why they stood out to begin with, and that's why it's kind of become a problem now, is because so many more people have embraced that type of writing mentality.
Yep.
Anyways, well, I agree with you. I don't really know how to like not to like they need my saving or something like that, but I don't really see any clear path to fixing DC. But one thing I'm curious about, and I know, like I mentioned the 50% Marvel and DC only ordering for retail thing earlier, but how important do you think it is for comic retailers as a whole to embrace a world outside of Marvel and DC to like have a more sustainable future?
Well, I mean, I think part of that is going to depend on where you are and what your market is,
Sure.
right? Like, you know, so if you're in a major metropolitan area, yeah, I think you're pretty stupid if you're only carrying Marvel and DC superheroes. That is just, I do not think you will be in business 10 years from now. You know, I don't think you'll be in business 5 years from now, but let's hedge our bets.
Right.
If you're in the middle of rural Kentucky, you know, and all of your customers are destination customers as opposed to casual walk-by shoppers, then having a mono specialist store like that makes a tremendous more sense. You know, I think at the end of the day, it ultimately comes down to what is your attitude as a retailer when someone comes in and asks for something that's outside of what you sell.
Yeah.
You know?
Can I
How
find this?
do you approach that? Are you, no, I don't have that, but I can get it for you very quickly.
Right.
You know, give me your information and, you know, hey, and if you like that, then maybe you'll also be interested in this, you know, as opposed to, no, we don't carry that. What's wrong with you? You know, because both of those things happen, right?
Yeah, totally.
You know, and so the stores that are, no, we don't do that. You know, the stores who are like, we carry both kinds of comics, Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, those kind of stores, you know, I mean, you're not getting new universe readers coming in all the time anymore. And part of that is because Marvel and DC have made it so you can't jump into their books, you know, because even if they do relaunch something like all new, all different, right? And here we are at month 4, and they've already started announcing crossovers.
Yeah.
Is it even month 4? Jesus Christ, I don't even think it is month 4.
No, it's month 3. I guess it is. No,
right.
Wait, yeah, I guess technically it would be month 4, but yeah.
But do you know what I mean?
No,
It's
totally.
like it just doesn't work for people. You know, I had this 20-something woman come in, and she walks up to me with confused ass look on her face, and she's like, she's holding Thor #1. She's like, no, I'm right. This is a reprint, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it's not a reprint. It's the brand new Thor #1. She's like, but why is it Thor #1? Isn't it supposed to be like 7? It was supposed to be 9, but or 10 maybe. She like couldn't calculate it in her brain why they would do that at all.
Yeah.
Like it literally made no sense to her whatsoever.
Yeah.
She could not figure it out. And I have to assume that there are people like that who don't come up and walk over to the rack.
They just leave.
Or over to the counter and ask us, you know?
Yeah.
That who walk in and go, I don't see the thing I want. I'm leaving.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that's probably just going to be just as true digitally and online and things like that as well. You know, I think that if you make it confusing for customers to buy your wares, you are going to have less customers in the long run. So I think that ultimately what it means, you know, when I started reading Marvel and DC superhero comics, you know, Superman had 2 books and Batman had 2 books. You know, everybody else just had 1, and they all teamed up in Justice League, right?
Right.
There wasn't, the commitment wasn't insane, right? Now, if you just want to follow Batman, you've got to read like 8 comics a month.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's absurd.
Yeah.
And it's really, 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 really difficult for new consumers to get into that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they really need someone to stand there and go, okay, look, just because there are 8 Batman comics doesn't mean you have to read 8 Batman comics. Just read this one, you know?
So one thing I want to say though is like I think it's really fascinating. Well, 2 things really quick. One is the renumbering has actually made it oddly difficult to even Google some of these books. Like
absolutely.
Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. I love that book, but like trying to find like the right article for Unbeatable Squirrel Girl #1 when there's 2 volumes in the same year is like weirdly hard to do.
Yep.
And then the other thing I was going to say is so I have a friend.
And also, you know, literally feel pity for every comic book retailer in America who has, for the end of time, until they stop selling comics, has to deal with that as back issues.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh my God.
Like,
I can't imagine.
Just trying to keep the bins organized from people, again, who don't know, you know? I know that sounds really small and petty, but that's the kind of like drops of sand on the back of your neck that eventually drive you insane and get you up in school towers with high-powered rifles. God damn it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Like that stuff. I mean, Uncanny X-Men went from not having been renumbered for like 50 years, 40 years. And like, and then it's had, I think like 3 or 4 volumes since then. It's just absurd. But I really wanted to share, my friend who has been a reader for life and is like, he has like a Batman, he has the Joker tattooed on his shoulder. He's hardcore. Right now, I mean, he was a DC fan for a very long time. And right now, one of the only books he's reading is We Are Robin. And he was like, he's really enjoying that book. And he thinks it's a great book. And he actually was like, I'm going to drop it during this Robin War thing because it's just like, I don't want to read those other books and it's not going to make a lot of sense if it doesn't. And it's like, it's unfortunate that even like the hardcore are getting chased away by these behaviors because like, it's weird to think of the 90s as this time of simplicity, but back then, like, if I wanted to just read Wolverine, I could read Wolverine, and it didn't have to tie in with everything. Like Wolverine.
Well, I don't know about
degree,
that.
Well, I mean,
I don't know about that.
I mean,
what about when Magneto stripped his adamantium?
That's exactly what I was gonna say. I mean, you didn't have to read that. You could read the after effects, and like he was rolling around on a motorcycle with like bones, and he's in pain all the time and stuff. But
yeah, with that do rag across his eyes.
Exactly.
Oh God, that was a horrible period of comics.
Hey, I was 8, man. Come on.
Yeah. So look. I mean, Marvel and DC are doing things that are like literally pushing their readership away.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is happening with Marvel. I think that's one of the reasons that All New All Different has really underperformed for most of the retailers that I've spoken to, because a lot of people took it as an opportunity to go, okay, I can step away now. They ended something. My collection is complete up to this line.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that you don't, if you're selling someone periodical entertainment, you don't want to break their habit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like selling drugs. You don't go, okay, if you're a drug dealer, you don't go like, all right, I'm going to take a month off. You don't get to have drugs for a month.
Yeah, you don't.
See you later, because by the time you get back, everybody who's addicted to your drug is going to be like, hey, wait, I don't need drugs. What am I doing?
Exactly. You don't do buy 10, get a month in rehab.
Exactly.
Moving on from Marvel and DC, in the responses I've gotten back so far from my the questions I've asked people, one shop, Floating World Comics in Portland, shared that 2.5% of their sales in 2015 were Saga, which I think is incredible. But looking at your list for your shops, it seems that was huge for your shop too. Have you ever had a book?
Yeah, it was substantially less than 2.5%, though. For what that's worth. Well, substantially less, yeah.
Yeah, but have you ever had a book outside of Marvel, DC, and like The Walking Dead that dominates sales to this degree?
Well, sure. I mean, Sandman would be the obvious.
Really?
Yeah. No. When Sandman was coming out in the early '90s, I mean, we were selling 4 to 5 times as many copies of Sandman as anything else.
Wow.
And again, the paperbacks would sell as fast as we could stock them.
Wow.
I mean, Saga is actually a couple of steps past that because Saga walked into a mature book market.
Sure.
So we're actually stocking Saga trades like 20 and 30 deep.
Damn.
Which is crazy. They almost everything in the store that we stock book-wise, we stock 1 deep. Mm-hmm. Because, you sell a copy, you're not going to sell another copy for at least a month. So it doesn't really matter if you have it in stock at that moment, Mm-hmm. But Saga, I mean, we sell them so fast, we have to keep 20 or 30 of every volume in on hand. But yeah, Sandman was exactly the same way. The launch of Vertigo was very, 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 very much like Images today, where there's a lot of interest, a lot of broad interest from a new readership. Who's looking, we call it the college age readership back then, and now it's just a diversity of people in general.
Yeah. Well, Vertigo was actually like my gateway drug from like reading comics about Wolverine rolling around on a motorcycle to like reading, the first comic I read that was, I was collecting Bone as a kid, but the first comic that I read that was like for adults was Preacher. And so like that was like kind of my gateway drug. So it is kind of, I think like you said, Image is kind of behaving like Vertigo was then.
Yep.
Because
they're publishing 8 times as many things, and so it's much easier for a book to get lost.
Yeah, that just blows my mind about Sandman, though. I mean, I'm from Alaska, and like I don't even know. I mean, I'm sure they carried Sandman, but I don't think it was like something that they really pushed. And I guess it really
But remember, this was the '90s, and it was San Francisco.
Yeah,
so you shouldn't be that flabbergasted, really.
But that was one thing that I was going to mention earlier, and I forgot to, was in your write-ups, you had mentioned that like for a very long time, DC, and I presume Vertigo as part of it, was like the top seller for you. So
no. For 24 of the 26 years this store has been open, DC has been our number 1 publisher, and not just our number 1 publisher, but our number 1 publisher by like 8 points.
Wow.
Like by this huge outlying, like much larger than anything that's rational.
Mm-hmm.
And that has absolutely changed.
Yeah, clearly. That's crazy. I mean, they're number 3 for you. So
yeah, they are number 3 for me. Yeah. And number 3 and falling, not just number 3, but they are They are openly falling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sales are bad for DC right now.
Yeah. Well, it seems like that. For
And
a lot
of course, the problem is that bad selling front lists, bad selling new books,
horrible selling
new comics, give you bad selling trade paperbacks because nobody wants. No, all this new 52 stuff they've been doing the last couple of years. Nobody wants any of those trades. You know that the Superman, the relaunch of Superman.
Wait, which one? Like the T-shirt
one? When it was Perez drawing it, and I don't remember who was writing it even. But, the new 52 launch.
Yeah.
Morrison was doing action, but they gave Perez Superman.
God, who was writing that?
I can't even remember.
Yeah.
But we've literally never sold a copy of Volume 1 of Superman.
That's hilarious.
New 52. Literally not sold one copy in 5 years. Like
that's incredible. That seems like
Superman. I mean, So yeah, it's a lot of shitty selling backlists there right now, and they the stuff that's keeping them alive. I mean, we still sell a lot of fucking copies of Sandman.
Right.
To this day, and Preacher and Why. And we are selling way more copies of those books than anything that DC itself is putting out.
That's wild. So I want to ask you about your book club, because I think that's super.
Yeah.
Like I think that's awesome. And I know you originally did that because of like the minimum wage hikes in San Francisco, but I could not believe, like, I believe that in your write-up on Savage Critics that, you said that some of the books that you've had in the book club represent 8 to 10% of their print run sales. Is that true?
Sure.
That blows my mind. I mean, like, how many people are in the book club?
We have almost 300 members of the book club now.
Mm-hmm.
And it is absolutely not uncommon for a book to have a print run of 3,000 copies.
Sure.
Or less.
Mm-hmm.
That is not abnormal at all.
Yeah.
That is very, 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 very normal.
Right.
You can see it. If you look at the diamond charts, you can see it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I presume that, like, I think you had Sandman Overture on there, so that probably is not.
No. Sandman Overture, we are nowhere near. No. I wouldn't be surprised if we were 0.5%, though.
Right.
Which would be a really good, solid number.
Yeah. But so, like, that whole thing. I mean, it seems like it's a.
We're probably not even 0.5%, though. We're probably more like 0.25%.
Still, I mean, that's a big book, but I just find it to be really fascinating. So you started because of the minimum wage hike, but how's that been going? And I really thought it was interesting that you expanded it to have a kids club and that your son was co-hosting it.
Yeah. Well, so to start off, I mean, it's all about the minimum wage hike. Going from $10 an hour to $15 an hour. Meant that based upon the number of staff that I had at the two-store, was going to have to come up with $80,000 a year. And right. I don't have an extra $80,000 a year just sitting around. Mm-hmm. If I did, my life would be very, very, very different. I mean, and I feel, perhaps crazily that if I'm able to increase sales by $80,000, I would like to keep some of that money, maybe just a little bit of it, right?
Right.
So I had to figure out a way to increase sales by $80,000, and so we came up with the idea of doing a national graphic novel of the month club. Mm-hmm. It's actually international. We've got 5 people out of the United States who we're sending books to, either monthly or bi-monthly. About half of the copies are here in San Francisco, and then the other half are all across the country. I think we have people in almost like 3/4 of the states, something like that.
Wow.
And it's really starting to grow and take off. We curate a book, and then we put together a meeting with the book's authors that we stream over the internet. People can ask questions, and it's here in the store, and it becomes a whole thing. And it builds community, and it puts out good comics out there, and it allows me to pay my staff what they're worth, mm-hmm. because I absolutely think they're worth that. And the great thing about it is the way that I've structured it is that as we get more members in the club, all of that money goes to my staff. So for every 25 members, they get a 25 cents an hour raise.
That's awesome.
So we have to hit 334 members is our goal, mm-hmm. To fully fund the $15 an hour minimum wage. We have like 3 more years to do it. So, and we're like almost there. We're 278, I think, is the number. But after that, every new sub that we sign up, it all goes straight to the staff. I don't keep any of that money. The kids club was the idea of, well, it wasn't the idea of, a teacher mentioned to us, who signed up for the adult club. A teacher signed up and said, would these be appropriate to share with my, 7th grade class or something?
Right.
I went, well, some of them, yeah, others, no, definitely not. We're not aiming at a 7th grade reading level. We're hopefully aiming at a college level or above reading level. But then I went, but that makes a whole lot of sense, right? I really should have something that's aimed at that group because there are enough good comics there. And so my 12-year-old co-hosts the club with me. We have a YouTube channel where you can actually see the meetings. I mean, they're not exactly immaculately produced or anything like that. But you can see what we do, and you can see Ben and I, and he asks questions too. And yeah, it's a ton of fun. It's really great having the kids in there.
Yeah.
Because my most fervent hope, and I think that this is going to happen, is that 20 years from now, assuming I'm knocking on wood that I'm still in business, I'm going to have kids. I'm going to have a graphic novel of the month for the adult club that was done by one of the kids who was in our kid club.
Oh, that'd be so cool.
That's my when that happens, then I'll be like, okay, now I can die.
Yeah.
And I think it will happen too, because I think that we're creating a lot of enthusiasm and passion in this group of kids for that. So yeah, it's pretty good stuff, I think.
I think that's great. I'm a huge proponent of kids comics and all ages comics and everything like that. And actually, I still shop at the same shop I went to when I was a kid, and I think I'm one of their longest running customers. And it's fun though, because people know me there because not just because I've been there for forever, but it is cool doing that. And I wish more places did things like that, because I think that, it builds a community more than just, making people it's a lot easier to quit a store when you just buy stuff there. It's a lot harder to do that when you actually have a connection to it.
Yep. I absolutely agree.
Okay, so I only got 2 more questions for you, but this next question could be a big one. So let's see what happens.
Okay.
So from your write-up about your in-store sales, it sounds like comic sales, or at least the periodicals, are up both at the top of the bottom of your top 100 list, and by a fair amount. So top books are selling, but there are a lot of comics being sold today or created today. Do you feel to a certain degree that there are too many comics being published today, at least from a retailer standpoint?
No, not to a certain degree, to the absolute nth degree. There are far more comic books being published today than there is a marketplace for. And it's not doing anybody any favors whatsoever.
That is interesting. So do you mean...
I know. I emphatically believe that. There is not a single publisher in comics today who is not overproducing, probably by 50%, and maybe by 100%.
Right. I do think it's interesting. I remember... I think it was a few months ago, DC and Image produced the same amount of periodicals in the same month. And I was I kind of I love Image, don't get me wrong, but I feel like that is not how it should be. And that just seemed once you start hitting those levels, you're hitting the same levels as Marvel and DC, and it just seems like an enormous amount. But so do you think does that make it harder to sell the books that you want to sell?
It makes it harder to sell the books that I want to sell without personal intervention in those books.
Sure.
Because the sea of choices on the rack is so vast that the consumer gets really overwhelmed looking at the rack and doesn't, it used to be back in the day that, when there were only, 20, 25 comics coming out in a week. I remember those times, that the 5 really good comics really stood out because there was only 25 to look at,
Right.
But now, every week we get 100 and 150 different comics. It's implausible is what it is.
Right. Well, I've explained or told this story a bevy of times while I've been on my podcast, but my wife went into my local comic shop with me once. It was the first time she'd ever been in at least that comic shop, and she just looked at everything and she was like, how do you know what to buy? And That's why it makes it like hand selling so necessary, but at the same time it's like it's unfortunate because like you almost need like a tour guide to be able to figure out what to buy these days.
Yeah, I actually call what we do being a Sherpa.
Really?
Well, I think it is. I think that it's like we take people up into the mountains and guide them through and show them the path, and here's how you get, and then here's your beautiful view.
Yeah. It's comic book Machu Picchu.
Yeah, exactly. No. I mean, it is insane on the top and the bottom how too many books are being published from every publisher across the board. The Marvel and the DC ones, excesses are really, really obvious when you've got 8 Batman books and 5 Avengers titles and things like that. I mean, it's just insane. You can't understand what's going on. On the independent side, I think it does a lot of creators a disservice, when let's look at Image, right? So I think a lot of people walk into Image thinking, well, I mean, that Robert Kirkman didn't really have anything, and he made a go of it, and Brian K. Vaughan, made his thing work over here. I'm going to be able to do that.
Right.
And it's not, sometimes it's just a matter of zeitgeist, sometimes it's a matter of right place and right time, sometimes, so it's not, you can't expect that just because you're published by the number 3 publisher nationwide, even though it's my number 1 publisher, mm-hmm. that your book is therefore going to sell,
right.
because there's things that books need to sell, like marketing. Mm-hmm. Image kind of doesn't do marketing,
right.
kind of,
They put it on the creators. I mean, it's creator owned and it's creator marketed.
Yeah. I mean, not fully, Image does some stuff, but Image is a totally different kind of publisher than anything that we have in this business in any way, shape, or form. They don't keep any of the money, so of course they're not going to really do very much to market it. But that means that as a creator, it's on you to really get out there and turn over those stones and kick those bushes and whatever your metaphor is.
It is really interesting that it seems like you look at how many books like Boom Studios is releasing, and it seems like they're kind of releasing the amount of books that you think like DC should be releasing. Which is amazing. But
in order to be a publisher, in order to have the overhead and support employees, and you have to publish X number of comics in order to make that work.
Right.
Right. It's all nice and easy for someone like me to go, well, if you just publish good comics, then they'll all sell, But it's very, very difficult to know until you've actually published those comics whether they're good or not.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, totally. You got to make it to find out if it's good.
Exactly. There's so many times that something sounds fantastic on paper, and it turns out to be a piece of shit when you actually read it. Or the other way around. Something sounds just terrible as a premise, and then you read it, and you're like, holy Christ, that's good.
Right. Yeah.
So, I feel like it's okay to cut publishers slack, but they are all radically overproducing, and they're making it really, really difficult for anything to sell as a result, or to stand out, should I say.
Yeah.
And so you get these fragmented situations where, you said that you saw a list from Challengers and from us, and who was the third one?
Big Bang Comics in Dublin, actually.
Big Bang Comics, right? And I bet they all looked entirely different because each one of us is hand selling different things.
Well, yeah, I mean, to a degree. I mean, Saga was clearly like a big factor, but like, yeah.
Sure, but when you get past that, I bet when you start getting into the weeds that the customer bases and the customer numbers are really different because as a result of that.
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, like it's. I mean, like I think number 4 for Big Bang was Chrononauts by Mark Miller and Sean Murphy, and it was because Mark Miller came and did a signing there.
Right.
And then like Challengers, they probably have local creators who do really well because they're in Chicago. So I mean, yeah, Alaska probably has wildly different too. I mean, it is interesting how different it is, but.
Well, because it's going to come down to what do the people who are there in the store day in and day out, what do they like, mm-hmm. or what do they believe in, right? Like, because certainly every store sells comics we don't like, mm-hmm. but the way that we present those comics to customers, has to do with how we feel about them,
Sure.
and how we feel about the publishers and how we feel about what they're doing. It's one of the reasons that I really have a hard time seeing how DC is going to solve their problem, because they've lost the retailer confidence.
Yeah.
That's almost the worst thing, and I don't see how you fix that. Not at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like you were saying about like the Vertigo books. It's like it's hard to. I mean, when it's hard to understand what those books are about after reading the first issue yourself, how are you supposed to sell it to somebody?
Exactly. Exactly.
So last question, and I know things are getting weird with Marvel and DC especially, but how are you feeling about where your business and comics as a whole are headed next year? I know that the upcoming quarter you are.
Yeah, no, I am worried. I am worried about first quarter because I think it's a lot of things have to shake out. I think particularly, I think that some of these problems are our own problems of just overbuying. I thought All New, All Different was going to hit, and it really missed big time.
Yeah.
And so I think there's going to be a huge adjustment for that, and depending on how the publishers react going forward, we'll see what the year looks out. I mean, I think that the medium of comics is stronger than it's ever been. And I've been doing this 26 years, and I really think the medium is as healthy and as wonderful and as good as it can be. Not as it can be, as it ever has been, and it is growing in a really consistent way. More and more and more and more people are starting to understand that comics are valid and true, and they're a great art form, and that they're not a medium that you can do anything in comics, right? Mm-hmm. And so as a result of that, I mean, I am extraordinarily bullish. If I had a giant pile of money, I'd probably open a third store right now, mm-hmm. Because I just feel like, things culturally, comics are going the right way. I am less than convinced that our publishers, particularly our two major publishers, have a handle on what they need to be doing,
right?
And how they need to be, fixing and shepherding their businesses and making sure that their business is not just having a good quarter, but is having a good decade. Mm-hmm. And I think that is really missing at both Marvel and DC. But by the same token, for a store, well, at least like the big store, Marvel and DC aren't really significant. I mean, they are. It's stupid to say they're not really significant. they're much less significant than they are at a lot of stores. And right. So I feel like I've positioned this store that I see the path through the shoals. I've got the skill over here. I've got the Charybdis over there. I know how to get past that, right? We've got a good chart. The Outpost, they're a Marvel store, and so I am constantly looking at that store, going, I hope this works. I hope this works. We're slowly trying to change the culture over there, and it seems like it's working. But I could see it floundering. I could see it, Mm-hmm. But I'm very bullish on the main store and where we are, and with books and just the vast number of people who are doing comics now, and the vast number of publishers, and how they really want to work with you. People really want to work with you and help you sell more stuff, and that's good, because there has been complacency, and certainly when you look at Marvel and DC, getting Marvel and DC to do things is really difficult a lot of the time, mm-hmm. Because they live in their boxes. Mm-hmm. They have built themselves very comfortable boxes, and they don't want to get out of those boxes, and so that's the big challenge, I think, coming up is will that happen? Will they get out of those boxes?
I feel like to a certain degree too, not to take away from your excellent final point, but that it seems like you think...
Yeah, you just ruined it, Dave.
I know, I'm horrible.
Ruined my point. Go on.
It seems like a big thing for, determining how comic retail does in this first quarter and year, in your mind, depends on how they handle like the way the industry is going itself.
Well, yeah, no, but I mean, so look, retail, I mean, if you want to get into the actual kind of nut and bolt of it, retail is all about managing inventory.
Right.
I mean, that's really what the name of the game is. If you can sell enough books to pay for your costs, and not have a bunch of shit left over, then you're fine.
Right.
And so, you know, when I read people like, oh, every store should get rid of Marvel and DC and be nothing but independents, like, I'm like, bullshit, right? If a store wants to be a Marvel and DC store, as long as they're selling enough stuff to pay their bills and pay their staff and you know, make a small profit, then let them be whatever they want to be.
Yeah,
you know?
sure. Yeah.
Every store should be the thing that it wants to be and be the thing that it's the best at.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but it's all about managing inventory. And I think that we're in a unusual position right now that I don't think that we've ever been in, where both Marvel and DC are going through some pretty severe growing pains or shrinking pains, depending on what you want to say, at the same time. Like, I can't ever remember any time in comics history where both publishers were fucking up this badly at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think inventory management and selling enough stuff to remain profitable is going to be a challenge for a number of stores.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's going to be as much of a challenge for me because I've been thinking about this kind of thing for 26 years, you know, and there's a number of stores. I don't think it's going to be a problem for challengers, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to, you know, like you can name the stores that have their heads screwed on and they get what they're doing and they're going to find their path through.
Mm-hmm.
But the stores that are only Marvel and DC, that's what they primarily do. I have concerns. I posted. There's a private message board, the CBIA, Comic Book Industry Alliance.
I've heard of it.
That's you know, sort of a retailer only board, and I put a survey in there of you know, what do you think your 2016 is going to look like, your first quarter, and I was actually flabbergasted. It wasn't a huge sample size, so don't take this as more than an anecdote.
Mm-hmm.
But 20% of the respondents said that they weren't sure that they were going to be here at the end of first quarter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's,
you know, I mean, it was you know, it was probably less than 50 people responding. So it's not a big enough sample size for that actually to be meaningful, you know? But it, you know, it concerned me, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, that really concerned me. I think we're going to have a flat first quarter here, but you know, we'll see what happens second, third.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out, but it sounds like it's good to be a senior citizen in the community. Sorry, though. Was that a mean joke?
No, it's all good. Super snapper.
Hey, you said it earlier. I was just quoting.
Yeah,
you.
no, I know. No, the problem is I used to be the young firebrand. You know? So to be the elder statesman and voice of reason is so weird for me psychologically. What can I say? You know, the store's 26 years old. Most of my staff wasn't born when my store opened.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I was born. Well, here's the real last question I have.
Okay, you were born. Great.
I was 5. So the real last question I have for you is: do you have somebody from Alaska in your book club?
Do I have someone from Alaska in the book club? I don't think so.
I'll be your first.
I'd have to go look.
I'll be your
but
first.
I don't think so. Will you?
Yes.
Do it. Yeah,
Right.
www.graphicnovelclub.com.
All right.
Yay! There's my plug.
There we go. I'll put it on the article too. But Brian, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate the time.
Oh, I'm happy to talk to you. There's no problems of any kind, my friend.
All right. You have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
You too. Happy New Year.
Yeah. Same.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, Brian Hibbs, on Twitter at @SavageCritic, online at savagecritic.com, in his column Tilting at Windmills on CBR, and in his shops Comic Experience and Comic Experience Outpost in San Francisco. You can find more sketch content at sketch.com. That's SKTCHD.com. Follow us on Twitter at @SketchComic. Like us on Facebook at /sketched. And if you're an iTunes listener, give the show a rating or review on there. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.